Welcome back, everybody, to the Engage podcast. Your host here, Ryan Argenta. Today, I'm with Casey Songster. She's the vice chairman of the SMS subcommittee of the Central Air Safety Committee. It's always fun to say that title. Casey, welcome back.
Thank you so much, Ryan. It's good to be here.
Yeah, so I'm glad to have you because today we're talking about ASAP, and I feel like pilots are generally familiar with the ASAP program, writing an ASAP report. We've all had that moment where something happens and you kind of look at the other pilot and you say, yeah, I guess we're going to file an ASAP. But I want to kind of dig into some of the details here, and you have a message for pilots about ASAP, but give me the background, the nutshell of your committee and how ASAP relates to that.
Definitely. So the Safety Management System Committee, we have about 20 volunteers just on our side. And the key component of SMS is discussing safety, risk management, safety assurance. We work a lot in safety promotion. We don't really do anything with safety policy, but a lot of our work is in safety assurance and safety risk management. And so ASAP plays into both of those components of SMS really highly. I would argue that it is more of a safety risk management program than a safety assurance program. But either way, it's extremely valuable data that we are able to review and assess in a de-identified way to try and help identify those hazards and apply risk controls.
That was a really great and professional explanation for truly for your program. And again, from that pilot perspective, I think there's a couple different trains of thought. And one is, this is a get out of jail free card, although it's not, but there are some protective aspects of it, but you are also contributing so it doesn't happen to the next guy.
Definitely. And what we see with ASAP, not to bore anybody with history, is the consequence of the early days of the FAA and the cat and mouse enforcement philosophy was nobody really wanted to share when they made a mistake. And we learned a lot from the Cali-Columbia crash with American Airlines. And that's why they started the very first ASAP program. Is there was a lot of information that pilots knew and hazards that existed out in the operation that weren't being reported to the company or anybody that could make any effective change. And so it was kind of like this core of tribal knowledge that was really not helping. And so if you didn't possess that knowledge, you might encounter a hazard that somebody else might have avoided. So that's kind of the dance we play when it comes to ASAP is we always ask for data, and there is still some reticence of just seeing ASAP as a get out of jail free card, or I didn't make a mistake, so why would I waste my layover or my precious time at home filing a report? And we really want to see and make sure everybody knows that that's definitely, there's more to it.
Yeah, and that's the thing, right? Delta pilots don't make mistakes, first of all, and I wouldn't know what it feels like to be wrong. So then how do you get data from ASAP? But maybe if we think of it in a different way of, well, guys, we did make a mistake, so let's file an ASAP, both for our own protection, but also to say, this taxiway, this signage is really obscured and hard to see, and so that's why we missed the taxiway. So you're giving that feedback to the safety system to help out your buddy, really, is the way I look at it. And the other thing is we didn't make a mistake, truly, but I see something and I'm going to say something, right? We're all familiar with that little coinage. And so maybe that's a reason to sit down while you're on your layover. Yeah, it takes just a few minutes, go into pilot reports, and you can go on DeltaNet and fill out an ASAP fairly quickly. And help out the next person. And then to be dramatic, like you could help prevent the next mishap, right?
Definitely. No, and you touched on something really important, and that's just culture. So even if an error was potentially made and recognized and a pilot decides to file a report, it's fully known that if one person makes one error, then absolutely at least 10, 20, 30 people will also make the same error. So why don't we report it? Whether it's, like you said, airport signage, that's definitely something that we could address and work on getting fixed. If it's a procedural error, maybe training related, then all of those things are well within our capability as an airline and as, part of our SMS protocols that we could resolve if we have the data. But I think a point of frustration I hear a lot on the line is why are these changes being made? Why did the checklist change? Why does this say that now? And a lot of that has to do with possibly a risk mitigation that was applied through our SMS process through data provided by ASAP. And that's part of the challenge when you have a large organization where you implement a change protocol and you can't close the loop with the pilot group of why that change was implemented. So, but ASAP is the main driver, and it's not even an argument. ASAP is the main driver of a lot of those changes and how we work through making the airline a little bit safer every day.
Do you have any examples of a direct result of like, hey, we got all these ASAPs, and so here's a change that was made?
Definitely. This was probably about a year ago. We had a crew flying into an outstation and they had an anomaly with the localizer. The localizer just went fully one side, fully to the other side, and then kind of went away. And then it came back and everything was fine. It was a VFR day, so they saw the airport pretty early on. They just clicked off the autopilot, hand flew, the approach landed. But it was really bizarre. It wasn't like an aircraft or an obstruction crossing the antenna that blocked the signal momentarily. It was something altogether different. And it stuck out to the crew. So when they got to their layover, they were kind of talking about, their gnarly experience and decided to file an ASAP. Once the report was de-identified, combined into an event and reviewed by the event review committee, they were able to forward it on to our base safety chairs and line safety coordinators, who were able to reach out to the airport authority at that outstation. And they were actually able to figure out that the antenna, it was actually radiating both ways. There was an issue with basically the nav aid, and it needed to be fixed. It was just something that was wrong with it. It had broken, but it wasn't telling anybody it was broken. So, and they were able to resolve it. And we don't really want to play the what if game, but if the weather had been less than ideal or IFR or hard IFR, then this crew might have had to go around. They might not have been able to land at that airport that day. So it was a really great thing that they were able to discover, and they didn't do anything wrong. They were able to land uneventfully. It might not have even stuck out in anybody's mind, but they filed that report and we were able to close that loop, get that fixed. So that's a really great example of what we would call an ASAP win, but also a major celebration for those pilots for taking that time to file that report.
Yeah, absolutely. Because like you said, you're tired, you've had a long day, you go to the layover, and then you're like, what is the time constraint for writing this ASAP? And when do I have to get this done? And then really the whole crew should write an ASAP for an event or an anomaly like that. And so you kind of get into this pattern, or you get into this like, I'll do it later. Then you get home and you just want to be home. And so what are the time constraints, if any, with ASAP nowadays?
Timeliness is not as big of a deal as we all think. There is an aspect of, at the conclusion of my rotation, I have 24 hours to file this report. But we really want to encourage people to forget that aspect, in the sense of, if you remember something, maybe you were cut off by a ramp vehicle, that's good data regardless. Hopefully you remember the flight number and anything along those lines. But timeliness, we really want people to remember, just file the report. And if you get reached out to, for instance, by like a FOCA gatekeeper or somebody on the ALPA side that says, hey, would you consider filing an ASAP? Timeliness is totally out the window at that point, because we really just want to make sure we capture the data that those pilots have. So, we all went to school, we all remember due dates. Really try to focus on submitting it as soon as you can, just because it's going to be fresh in your mind. You're going to remember the most detail, and maybe you'll be a little mad about it, and you'll come up with some really good mitigations and, recommendations for preventing it in the future. But otherwise, we just ask you to file the report.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Right. So 24 hours after the conclusion of a rotation would be ideal. And that's what's written. But just think of it as, oh yeah, it's 3 days later. Let me get this in to help the next person out, would be a way to look at that.
Exactly.
Tell me about maybe some back end nuggets that pilots don't really see, but what I would want, right? So a lot of times we write an ASAP and we don't get some feedback or closure, right? Sometimes you do close it out. You get the automated email that says, or seemingly automated email that says, your ASAP's been closed out, no further action. Sometimes you may get a phone call or an email from a program manager or a volunteer. But I think pilots also look for that loop closure, if you will, of, hey, I submitted this and somebody looked at it. And so I want pilots to understand it. ASAPs just don't go out into a black hole. They're all looked at. They're all considered. Give me some of that back end information that pilots can kind of hang on to.
Absolutely. Yeah, last year, 2024, we had 28,000 ASAP reports, and that is amazing. The more the merrier. There's no hard cap, but it's really hard to reach out to each individual submitter and tell them what happened with the report. It's a worthwhile undertaking, no doubt about it. That is one of the common bits of feedback we get from pilots is, I feel like it just goes into a black hole and I never hear from anything again. Another area of concern is what if somebody does reach out to me? About 2% of all ASAP reports result in some form of follow-up, whether it be a phone call, like we call it a subject matter expert phone call, or a debrief, which is all protected under the ASAP in terms of being de-identified. Nothing goes on the record. But for the average submitter, not hearing anything and just getting that automated email can be kind of what feels like a little bit offensive. I took the time to submit the report. Why can't you take the time to reach out to me? And the challenges of that, it's worthwhile to undertake. That's something they're very aware of on the ASAP program side. But what I would tell pilots is if you want to know more about the safety, like the back end of safety, I would definitely not hesitate to reach out. There's an email on the ASAP page in DeltaNet where you could actually reach out and ask questions. In some cases, you can request data in the event, it was a particular event, maybe you had a TCAS array and you want to know, hey, how close did we really get? Maybe just for your awareness, or you could definitely get that data. So that's available on DeltaNet if anybody is interested. But overall, even if you don't get customized personal feedback when you submit a report, the back end of ASAP is so convoluted in a good way. It's complicated because it's a complicated program that just know it's going and it's being reviewed. And if it's closed, that doesn't mean it's the end of what you submitted. That probably means that data is going to go and get combined with other data streams like FOQA and LOSA and result in a larger review of maybe any systemic threats that we could identify from your report.
Okay. So either just a little patience or just understand, hey, my feedback's being received and acted upon. I may just not hear back, knowing now that there's 28,000 plus reports generally per year.
Yeah, and that was a super long answer, so I apologize.
That was a great answer, and it's worth saying. It's easy enough to file an ASAP, help out yourself and help out others. You can do it on your iPhone. It's a very simple form. You go to Pilot Reports and ASAP's under there. If you do get a follow up call, the 2%er, is that a union representative? Is that somebody from Central Air Safety reaching out? Is that somebody from the company? Who is that?
Currently, we have a series of ASAP debriefers that do a lot of these phone calls. They're hired by the company. They're regular line pilots. They reach out. They're human factors trained, so they're really good about talking about the event, kind of breaking it down, providing any takeaways if necessary. It's never an instructor or a line check pilot. It's always just kind of a peer who's an expert in human factors who will offer some takeaways, maybe some tools and techniques. And we really get a lot of great feedback from pilots that do have those calls because it kind of helps them see the event, kind of get some closure afterwards. So those are always really well received. And the same thing's true when a gatekeeper might share some data. That's always a really great process we have, where if it was an event where FOQA data might have been requested, then it's always a gatekeeper displaying and showing that, and you really get an appreciation for what the FOQA team does, because it is just always incredible to see the animations of the flight and how much data we have.
Yeah, that's interesting. And so I do want to switch gears a little bit to let listeners get to know the subject matter experts. But all this safety stuff's going on in the background. We'll kind of end on this note, but Casey, what charges you up when you wake up in the morning and you're like, oh yes, I get to look at ASAP reports, or I get to do a LOSA observation? Like, what is your best day ever?
I have always loved seeing the process work from start to finish. You have to be patient. It does take time. But when you get to see and attend these meetings where we look at all the data, what's going on out there, what sort of nonsense are we discovering, what new hazards have been identified, and then walk through the management process, how we go through applying risk controls, how they're applied, what timeline works. That's a really, really cool. It's very academic in nature, but no airline does it the same. The way Delta processes the volume of information and how we've got a team of pilots full-time over in the company or on the central air safety side as volunteers, but also our various experts and analysts work through that. That is incredible. And it's something I wish every pilot had the opportunity to see. It's kind of like an OCC tour where you really get to see the heartbeat of the airline. It's kind of the same thing in safety. So I have a lot of faith in the way the process works. No one's process is perfect. No airline has the best airline and everything, but the continuous improvement, the goal for, absolute perfection, like we do on the line, it's awesome to see.
Okay. You heard it here. This is why people like Casey are in these positions that, she sits by the pool and reads ASAP reports instead of Vogue magazine. We appreciate that. Casey Songster, thanks so much for being here. Thanks for talking about ASAP. We appreciate you.
Thank you so much, Ryan. Appreciate it.
You're listening to Engage, the podcast for Delta pilots. Follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your favorite podcast platform, and receive notifications when a new episode is available.